just to kind of warm things up a little bit as you guys are turning to Exodus chapter 3, and to give you a little bit of a background on myself, former U.S. Navy SEAL, and to kind of paint that picture of what we do in the SEAL teams. The last deployment I was involved in, we were out in Iraq and given the task of hunting down men that make suicide vests and those roadside bombs, IEDs. And while we're out there, we're working with this group. It's called the ISOF. They're the Iraqi Special Operations Forces. And so one of our goals with these guys is to simply teach them how to fight their own fights. And so we figured the best way to do that is to train them on base, but beyond that, go outside that wire and fight side by side with them. Well, if you can imagine a whole deployment going by, I'd say pretty good, because we've bagged and gagged some pretty bad dudes. We're making the world a better place. And we're coming up on what looked like just enough time on the calendar to do maybe one more operation. And we weren't real certain if the ISOF was ready for us to pass that baton off to them. So we decided, hey, here's what we'll do. We'll make this final operation that we have time for sort of a graduation operation. We'll let them plan the whole thing from the ground up, and we'll be there with them just in case things don't go right. And so they have to start from scratch, hitting the streets. What's the first thing they need? They need some information. They need some intel to operate on. So as they're hitting these streets, they find this source. Source kind of gives them the word about this guy that's out there on the street that's an Iraqi policeman by day. But at night, back home, as it turns out, he's one of these bomb makers that we're looking for. And to kind of give you an idea of the type of coward or character that these suicide bombers have, a lot of times, these guys that make the suicide bombs are not the ones that are actually willing to strap it on themselves. In fact, they have such a difficult time finding somebody that would be willing to put the vest on. One instance over there, they couldn't. And so what they did is they found two mentally handicapped women. They had no idea what was going on. And they dressed them up with these vests, strapped them on, shoved them off to a crowded marketplace. And then these guys watched from a distance like cowards as they set it off with this remote, killing these women and obviously so many more. So this kind of gives you a picture of the type of character that we're up against. But the ISOF, they've figured out where this guy lives. They've got his number. And so they present this plan to us, how they want to approach the house, get in, grab this guy, and get out of there. And so as they're presenting this plan to us, they also had one complaint. And their complaint was they felt they got shot at more than we did in the SEAL teams. And so they thought they figured out why, and they're saying, we think it's the color of your guys' uniforms. We're like, really? You think it comes down to the mere color of a uniform, not the way we shoot, move, communicate, nothing to do with tactics. You think it comes down to just the color of a uniform, and these guys are just convinced of this. And so they had this request. They're asking if we'd be willing for this final op to take off our American-colored uniforms and put on their uniforms. So, all right, you want us to blend in with you so that we get shot at more with you? And they're like, nodding their heads like, yeah. It's like, fine. It's not about the uniforms. And so we get the uniforms on. Of course, I'm blending in just fine with those guys once I got that uniform on. Guys on my team are looking at me like, hey, Williams, you're really starting to blend in with those guys. And so on this night, this final operation, I'm standing up in the Humvee, that section called the turret. You see it in the movie sometimes. That guy is just kind of standing part of the way out of the vehicle like this. And so I've got the .50 caliber machine gun in front of me. And for those of you that might not know what that weapon means is it's a weapon that could really reach out and touch somebody. Let's put it that way. I've got these night vision goggles on. I'm looking through my green little world and just kind of going over this mental inventory as I'm thinking about all the things I know about this night, how it's going to go down. I know where this guy lives. I know how we're going to get in, grab him, extract. But one unique thing I know, I couldn't help but to think about it as I was standing there. I couldn't help but to think about the fact that I know this is it. This is the last operation, which means I know just a matter of days from now, I'm going to be back in my hometown, Southern California, out there in the ocean. But here's what none of us really knew about that night, was that we were actually being set up the entire time to get thrown the absolute worst circumstances we've been in on this entire deployment, as we find ourselves getting set up on an ambush, and suddenly now we're engaging in this gun battle for our lives. And it really was the team's ability to shoot, move, communicate, and do what we do best in the SEAL teams that led to the obvious conclusion. I'm standing alive before you this morning, but I do think it's worth remembering and reflecting on that our freedoms aren't free. And we need to remember what they're paid for in. They're paid for in the currency of our soldiers' blood on the battlefield. And there's spiritual truth to that as well, because when you think about it, our spiritual freedom certainly wasn't free. It was paid for in the highest price the Lord could have paid, the currency of his own blood there at the cross. And so more on how that ambush played out, perhaps if we get some time to get around to that, but most importantly, I do want to be getting into God's word. So you guys have Exodus chapter 3 pulled up, and just for setting up a little bit of historical context here, where do we find ourselves in this book of Exodus at this point? Well, we find ourselves in the land of Egypt. And the land of Egypt is the land of the Egyptians, but it's important to remember that they didn't live there by themselves. They coexisted. And some of the people that they coexisted with were none other than God's own, the children of Israel. And everything was really going good for a while for the children of Israel. Well, why? Well, because of one of Israel's own, Joseph. You guys remember the story of Joseph? He's the ultimate rags to riches story. I mean, this kid knew what it was like to grow up firsthand under domestic abuse as his brothers decided that they even wanted to kill him. Then they realized, you know what, we can actually turn a profit off of his life. And they sold him off into human trafficking. He became a slave. But all the while, he remained faithful to the Lord and steadfast. Then he gets wrongfully thrown into prison for something he didn't do. And so he's locked up, but he stays faithful to the Lord, and then he goes from being in prison to suddenly he becomes prince. He literally becomes second in command over all of Egypt, second only next to the very Pharaoh himself, the king himself. And so because of this sort of rise to prestige, all of his countrymen, his family, they're able to kind of ride along on his coattails. But like some good things in life, unfortunately, this one was not going to last. And so Joseph died. We're informed that the king that knew Joseph died. Exodus chapter 1 verse 8 says that a new king came about, and this new king, he knew Joseph not. And so the children of Israel, they lose their charitable king, the king that was showing them, favor. They go from this charitable king to a genocidal king. He decides he wants to take out all the Hebrew baby boys, because he's looking at the children of Israel, seeing how they're flourishing, seeing how God's multiplying them. And at first he was trying to give them hard work, back-breaking labor. It wasn't California to be the first one to take away the straw. He did it. He took away straw from the people. I thought I'd try that one out. Maybe I won't use that again. I was going to say also he didn't walk in his predecessor's footsteps. They say he walked like an Egyptian, but maybe it's too early in the morning for these things. But he gives them this back-breaking labor. He wants to make their lives miserable, but the more miserable, the more he tried to turn up the heat, the more that God blessed the children of Israel. So he takes it next level. He's going to kill all the baby boys. So one would come to be born that we know as Moses. And Moses has that mama bear that is not going to let her child be exposed and killed that way. And so she gets creative, and she comes up with this master plan. She realized, as she observed the princess would often go down to that Nile River, she realized that if maybe I put my baby boy in a basket down there in the Nile reeds, her heartstrings will get tugged. Perhaps she'll do something about it. Well, sure enough, she did. She took him in as one of her own. And ironically, Moses got his name, when you think about it, not from his birth mother. He got his name from the Egyptian princess. She was the one that named him Moses. She says, I'll call him Moses. And that name has significant meaning. It means to be drawn out of. And so the same way that the Lord drew the people out of Egypt into the land of promise, and he used Moses to draw those people out, Moses started off coming out of that muddy Nile reeds, being drawn out of that water. And then he goes from these muddy reeds to suddenly he becomes royalty. And so now he's living the life. He's in the palace. He's living that life of prestige. He's eating at the king's table. But all the while, the children of Israel, they're still suffering. And so the New Testament informs us in Acts chapter 7, Stephen, he lets us know, the martyr, the first martyr of the church, that Moses thought that his people would understand that God was going to use him to deliver them. And so that was Moses' motive here, as one day he steps in when he sees an Egyptian beating on one of his countrymen, and he lays hands on the guy. Takes things a little too far. He winds up killing the guy. And so what does he do? Well, with this mistake, like so many of us, when we make a mistake, try and cover it up. So he literally tried to cover this guy up in the desert, and it probably didn't take much more than a soft wind to expose the thing that he had done. Another day goes by. He doesn't realize other people are aware of what he had done, that he killed that guy. And he sees a couple of his countrymen in a fight with one another, and he wants to try and play mediator. He wants to try and bring them together. And so he's getting in the middle of it. And they're looking at him saying, who do you think you are? They're challenging his identity. He's like, I'm Batman. No, he didn't say that. But they're challenging his identity. Who do you think you are? Who made you judge and prince over us? And then they say, what, are you going to kill us? Like you killed that Egyptian? Could you just imagine the draining look and just the heart-sinking moment and feeling that Moses must have had? Because if you think about it, I mean, he really put his neck out there on the line for his own people. And look at what they're doing. They're just turning it on him. And have you ever done that before for somebody? Where you really put yourself out there, you really sacrifice for them, and they basically turn around and look at you and go, well, I didn't ask you to do that for me. And so that's what he's getting right here. And so he realizes that he has no loyalty from his people right now, even though he put himself out there for them. King's going to find out about this. And the king did find out about this, and so what happens to Moses? He gets greenlit. A hit goes out on Moses, and so he's becoming a fugitive. He's on the run. And he's way out in the back of the desert. And that's where we find ourselves in Exodus chapter 3. And we're just going to look at that first verse there. Exodus chapter 3. Starting in verse 1. Where do we find Moses? It says, now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the back of the desert. And came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And so focusing in on just being out there in the back of the desert. Can you try to imagine just the feeling that Moses might have had of, what a wasted life, wasted opportunity. Looking back in the rearview mirror of time, thinking about how good he used to have it when he was living like a VIP, when he was there in the king's palace. But look at where he's at now. Why did I have to stick my neck out there on the line for my people when they all just turned around on me? Look where I find myself now, way out here in the back of the desert, just going through the dry lands. And sometimes, some of us could be going through that season. Many of us in this room, just by the law of averages, could be sort of going through that desert experience right now. You look back in the rearview mirror of time and you think about how good things used to be in the workplace, how good things used to be in your family. But things seem to have taken a turn. And now you're just kind of going through these dry lands. You're on hard ground, out there in the valley, this desert experience. I want you to kind of take into consideration this morning is the possibility that maybe going through this sort of dry land, this desert experience, is exactly where we need to be before God could take us to where he wants us to be so that he can use us. And I do believe there's biblical precedent for that. Because we know the story of Moses. Ultimately, Moses will not spend all of his time out there in the back of the desert. God is going to use him. And we will see that. And we know that the children of Israel, they were led out into the desert for how long? 40 years. Before they had the great honor and privilege of crossing over that Jordan River into that land of promise, the land of milk and honey. They needed to go through a desert experience first. Or look at all the greats that God has used throughout history, known as men of the desert, like the prophets, the prophet Elijah, or John the Baptist. Where was he? He was a man of the wilderness, a wild man, eating that locust and honey. Before what? Before God ultimately used him for the great honor and privilege of making straight the kingdom of the Lord. Or even think of the Son of Man, Jesus himself. What was he known as? This man that spent 40 days and 40 nights where? Out in the wilderness. Before what? Before the preaching ministry really began. And so maybe going through these dry desert seasons is exactly where we need to be before God can take us to where he wants us to be. It is a place of preparation. And there's this anonymous poem that I think captures this brilliantly. So I can't attribute it to anyone. You can't find the person who said it, but the words are so true. It goes like this. It says that when God wants to drill a man and thrill a man and skill a man, when God wants to mold a man to play the noblest part, when he yearns with all of his heart to create so great and bold a man that all the world should be amazed, watch his methods and watch his ways. How he ruthlessly perfects whom he royally elects. How he hammers him and hurts him, and with mighty blows converts him into trial shapes of clay, which only God understands. While man's tortured heart is crying and he lifts beseeching hands, how God bends, but he never breaks when it's man's good that he undertakes. And how he uses whom he chooses, and with every purpose fuses him, by every act induces him to try his splendor out. God knows, what he is about. And so sometimes we're going through that desert place. Sometimes that hammer is out with the chisel, and God is the master sculptor, and he's chipping away. And sometimes whole chunks are coming off, and it hurts. And we look to God going, why? What is this all about? But what we need to know is to not question him, to trust him that this master sculptor, he has an image in mind, that he is forging us, he's shaping us, he's molding us into something, and we do get bent by him, but he doesn't break. And so he's trying his splendor out. He's the one that he knows what he is all about, and we just need to have that faith and trust in him. He knows what he is up to. And so we read on Exodus chapter 3, going into verse 2. Moses out there in the desert, suddenly this happens. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here am I. And so very interesting, just looking at verse 4 again, what did the Lord observe? When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, that is when God called him. Maybe God could have never gotten Moses' attention the way that he has his attention now if he wasn't going through this desert experience. It's kind of hard to get our attention when everything's going great in our life. And C.S. Lewis, he makes this point when he says that God's voice kind of operates like a whisper to us when everything's going good. We're the ones that are calling out to God when we, come across a fall, right? Like there's no atheists in foxholes. So he says that pain and suffering, sometimes that operates as God's megaphone to rouse a deaf ear. And so maybe when he was living this life of comfort in the palace, God could have never really gotten his attention in this way. It's when we go through these desert experiences, these dry lands, that's when we're seeking, we're looking. God can really get our attention because we want to hear from God. And so now God's observing. When the Lord saw that Moses turned aside to look, he's like, now I've got your attention, Moses. Now I have you. That's when God called out to him. And God's calling out to him, and he's finally going to get the call that he always wanted. And so we go down to verse 7 here, where the Lord is going to be speaking to Moses. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. So I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from the land to a good enlarged land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Verse 9, now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come now therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And so God is essentially saying to Moses, hey Moses, you're about to be my patriot. We're about to set up a sort of declaration of independence. You are no longer going to be a part of that land, a part of that country, a part of those people, because they have put you into slavery. You're serving under a tyrannical king, and you're about to go to the land of the free. So much like our own country started off. If you guys remember, in the early Americans, the patriots, the originals, they had things going pretty good for them for a while, just like these children of Israel in Egypt. But eventually there was a tyrannical ruler, a king, much like a pharaoh, King George III, and he looked on at what was happening over here in America, and he thought the people had it too good. And so like this king that took away straw, gave them backbreaking labor, he decided to begin to tax the people without any real accountability, that taxation without representation. Everything really came to a head at one point during an infamous moment called the Boston Massacre, where he sent troops over that ultimately killed innocent civilians. And so the early Americans, they tried to extend a sort of olive branch and make peace with the king, but instead of extending the hand of fellowship, he extended more troops to try and take away the weapons. And why would they want to try and take away weapons? They want to try and take away weapons so that you cannot defend your own family, so that you cannot defend your countrymen. And so brave men stood in the gap as these troops came to try and take away the weapon caches. And that infamous moment of that shot heard around the world is you have brave men that stood in the gap saying, give me liberty or give me death. And so the gunfight ensued, the battle ensued. And ultimately, that liberty that they were looking for, that freedom came. And it was penned into history as what? That Declaration of Independence. We are no longer a part of this tyranny. We are free people. And all too often, it took blood, sweat, tears, hard work, determination, and men that literally gave up their lives. John Adams, who said, your generation, speaking of our generation and other future generations, your generation will never know how much it cost my generation to preserve your freedom. He says, I hope that you will make good use of it. I hope he's not rolling in his grave, seeing the use that has been made of it, lately. Are we living a life that really was worth dying for? And so Moses is getting this call from God. God's telling him, basically, Moses, you are about to be my patriot. I'm going to have you deliver a declaration of independence to that king, a sort of let my people go message. And there's going to be power in that message. It's weaponized words I'm sending you with. But what is Moses' response? He's finally getting the call. He's finally getting to do that thing that he always wanted to do. And Moses' response in verse 14 is this. Verse 13. Verse 11. Verse 11, Moses' response. But Moses said to God, who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? I find it so interesting that, 40 years has gone by here in the desert. What was the last question he was ever asked 40 years ago by his own countrymen, his own people? It was a challenge on his identity. Who do you think you are? And so here he is 40 years later out there in the desert, still stuck on the last question he was ever asked by his own people. Who do you think you are? This whole who am I mentality is a very toxic way of thinking. Thinking that, maybe I'm just not the right person, for the job. Maybe extraordinary accomplishments are for extraordinary people. And this is just sort of the deck of cards I've been dealt in life. This is the household that I've been raised in. This is the pedigree that I come from. Maybe it's a broken home. Maybe you don't have the same opportunities and privileges that other people have had. Maybe you haven't gotten to go to the same schools. You get the same setup. I want to make a point that, some people, they get a better start. Some people, they do get things in a better way in the beginning, but that's not the most important stuff. That's not really the determining factor in terms of how your future will go. Where you come from, your pedigree, your DNA, that doesn't determine your destiny. The most important stuff is stuff that's accessible to everybody, no matter what place you started from, and it's all about your desire. It's all about your heart, your mindset. In fact, that's what SEAL training is all about. A lot of people think sometimes, Navy SEALs, these guys, some people are just born with it, some people have it, and some people just don't. And so these guys are just, they're cut from another piece of cloth. And they got that something special to become a Navy. This could be further from the truth. Our SEAL creed goes like this. Speaking of the identity of a SEAL, it says he's the common man, but with uncommon desire to succeed. And so when you show up to SEAL training, you got people from all different types of backgrounds. You do have former professional athletes. You have Olympic athletes that show up to SEAL training. But then you also have the guys that maybe just played sports in schools, or the guys that never played sports, never played on a team at all. But they kind of just wake up one day, roll off the couch, and they have the calling. They realize this is what they want to do. They want to be a Navy SEAL. And you never know who's going to make it, and you never know who's not. You can't pick them out. Case in point, the first day of training, I remember showing up, 173 of us together. And the instructor comes into that room and he asks us, he challenges us. He says, how many of you are willing to die before you give up and quit? Well, that's the mantra of everybody there. We're all pounding our chest saying, "Hoo yeah, that's our yes." And he goes, great. He goes, this is what I want you to do then. Why don't you take a look around the room? Take a mental picture of the guy on your left and on your right. So we're all looking around the room at each other. And he says, if you got people in front of you and behind you, do the same thing with them. So we're looking around the room, taking these mental pictures. And he goes, chances are, if you are still standing here for graduation day, chances are that means that each of these guys, these 4 other people you just looked at, they didn't make it. Do you really think you're the one in that group? And I remember we're all kind of looking around at each other. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, where are these quitters going to come from? Like, I do know in my heart, it's not going to be me. But at the same time, these guys, I've seen how they're pretty tough. We have already suffered under the hands of these instructors. They have already put us through some beatdown sessions, and nobody has quit yet. And so what I began to think is, how much do we have to suffer before some of these guys start falling off? And so realizing the majority of the room has got to go, I'm trying to find that low-hanging fruit. Like, where are some of the guys I could just, like, pick off, like that guy, some of the first guys to quit? Well, as I'm looking around the room, I'm having a hard time finding anyone I would pick out to maybe quit. In fact, I see this guy, Barth. Now, Barth, he was not one of the guys I thought of as there's one of the guys that's going to quit. He captured my attention in such a way where I thought to myself, man, there's one of the guys that's definitely going to be there for graduation day, because Barth was the extraordinary one. He was that guy that was just cut from another piece of cloth. It seemed like he was born and bred to be a Navy SEAL, just blessed with that DNA that produced some kind of muscle and stamina and speed to where, here's how it was. There's never a question over who was going to get first place. When we're all about to go compete in something, we're all looking around at each other. We know who's going to get first place. It's Barth. He's so far ahead of everybody else. He's in such a league of his own that the real question is like, okay, who's grabbing second place? We know who's going to win. So I'm looking at him thinking, well, there's one of the guys that's definitely going to be there for graduation day. And then I'm kind of catching myself thinking, man, what am I doing? I got to find someone that's going to quit, not graduate. I'm struggling to pick out anybody. And then I see this guy, Alex Gagne. How could I forget about Alex Gagne? He's the exact antithesis of Barth. I mean, this guy's the total opposite. The ugly duckling of the class. He didn't play any sports growing up. He is that guy that just rolled off the couch. He was playing video games. One day decided to just unplug the electronics, and he wants to be a Navy SEAL. And so the very fact that he's even there was sort of an insult to the rest of us, because he shouldn't be amongst us. That was the feeling. Like, he made it through the bare minimum requirements. I don't know how, but he is not only going to quit, he's the locker room talk. That's going to be the first guy to quit. And so, at least I kind of got that resolved in my head. There's the first guy's going to quit. Well, the irony of it all is that by the time we get to the most difficult part of training, Hell Week, who's amongst the first to quit? Well, it's not this guy Gagne. He's still around. Amongst the first to quit was this guy Barth, the stud of the class, the extraordinary one, the guy blessed with that DNA. And who was one of the guys that ultimately made it all the way through that pipeline and became a Navy SEAL. That ugly duckling of the class, that locker room talk guy, Alex Gagne, the runt of the litter. So what does that demonstrate for you? What that demonstrates is the truth of this principle, the truth of that line from the SEAL Creed, and what I'm really trying to hammer home here is that it's the common man with uncommon desire to succeed. There are uncontrollable things in life. We don't get to pick what family we get raised up in. There's a lot of things that are completely out of our control, but that's not the controlling influence in our life. The most important controlling influence isn't that DNA that determines destiny. It's something we all have access to no matter where you start from. It's desire, it's heart, it's mindset. And so when Moses here is asking this question, who am I? He's asking the wrong question. God knows all about his resume. He knows all about the past. This whole who am I question is the wrong question. The right question isn't who am I. It should be, well, who is my God? Because that's where the real power and authority is. And so God just needs to check Moses' heart. Where is your heart? Do I still have that same guy that we're informed about, Moses, in Acts, where it says that he thought his people would understand that God was going to use him to deliver them. God is going to use him. Moses, you are God's patriot. You are the one that he is going to use. Just check your heart. Where is your heart? And there's a lot of biblical precedent for that. God is all about the heart. We have a way of looking at things. 1 Samuel 16:7 tells us of God. It says that God doesn't look at man the same way that man looks at man. For man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. That's what he's concerned about. Think about David. David was the runt of the litter. He was that sort of Alex Gagne. He wasn't even in consideration. He was the locker room talk guy. When they're looking for a king to replace Saul, what did the prophet do? He went to the house of Jesse, and they go through this list of sons, and he's like, this is it, because none of these guys are the one. He's like, well, I got David over there, the little run of the litter. What do we know about David? We have some insight. David had a certain type of heart, and that's what we're talking about here, heart. He had a heart that was after God's own heart. And what did God ultimately do with that little David amongst a whole lot of things? That little runt of the litter, he used him to chop the head off of a giant, Goliath, because he had that heart after God's own heart. It's all over the scriptures. 2 Chronicles 16 tells us how the eyes of the Lord go to and fro throughout the whole earth to show himself strong on behalf of those whose hearts are loyal towards him. So, Moses, your resume doesn't matter here. Just check your heart. Do you have the right heart? You're asking the wrong question. It's not who am I. Remember where the power and authority comes from. It's who is my God. Verse 12. So he, speaking of God, said, I will certainly be with you. And this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Then Moses said to God, indeed, when I have come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And so what is this name of God? He is the I am. And this, to this very day, even in Judaism, is one of the most revered names for God, the great I am. And I think it's important to understand that the children of Israel, the people, they didn't have a proper name for God up until this point. They didn't know him in this personal way, a name for God. How was he known before? It was kind of impersonal. It was always the God of our fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And so now Moses is asking for some special revelation here. What's your name? What's the name I can give these people? How can I get some special intel right now? And so God reveals himself as the I am. And one of the really important things to understand here is what would this name look like in the Greek? Because we know the Old Testament is primarily written in what language? Hebrew. But during the time of Jesus, in that first century, Hebrew was practically a forgotten language. And so it became paramount. It became important for the Jewish people to have scriptures that were written in a language of the people, the common people. And so they came up with a Greek translation of the Old Testament. And I don't know if you realize this or not, but the vast majority of the time you ever read the New Testament or Jesus quoting something from the Old Testament, the version that they quote from is the Greek version that they had. It's not from the Hebrew. And so this Greek version that they had, it had a name. It's called Septuagint. And so this was written 3 centuries before Jesus ever walked the face of this earth. And it's called Septuagint because it means the 70. And that the 70 has some meaning to it. They took 70 of the top premier scholars, and they directly translated from that Hebrew into the Greek. A very sharp and accurate translation. And so this translation is seen as authority and authoritative. In a sense, it has God's stamp of approval upon it. Why? Because Jesus quoted from it. And so Greek was the language of the people during that day. Hebrew was a forgotten language because the Roman Empire had conquered Greece and they adopted some of their influences Just like when a place is conquered, sometimes influences from those places, like food, is adopted. They really like the Greek language. And so Greek literally became what they called the lingua franca of the day. It was the language of the day, the common language of the people. And so we know now that that's what Jesus was reading from when he would quote Scripture. And so the interesting thing then would be, so when Jesus would read Exodus 3:14, or when the people of the day would read Exodus 3:14, and God has this name, the I am, what would that sound like? What would that be in the Greek? It's pretty simple. The I am name is just ego ami. I am. Ego ami. Well, we know how God will ultimately use Moses here. God says, I will be with you. We know that's where the power and authority is ultimately going to come from. And so Moses is getting this sort of commission right now. Like a Navy SEAL that's been given a duty and a task. Like a patriot, he's about to go and deliver this declaration of independence. Let my people go. Where's the power in that? It's a weaponized message. It's because the authority of God is in that message. That let my people go message is a whole lot more than just let them go. It set them free. No more captivity, no more bondage. They are not your slaves anymore, God of that age, Pharaoh. Well, that's sort of the pulling away point, because now I want it to get really personal. This same God that spoke to Moses and self-revealed himself as the I am, and gave Moses a duty and a task, a commissioning, to go and spread a sort of declaration of independence, let my people go, a weaponized message. That same God that spoke to Moses speaks to you and I, and in a paralleled way. He gives us a commission. He gives us a weaponized message that we're supposed to spread that sets captive people free from the Pharaoh, the God of this age, as the Bible calls him in 1 Corinthians, Satan. People are enslaved. They're in captivity like they were in Egypt, but the captivity here is to sin. But God has his patriots in place. He has his people. And so he's called us. And if that isn't clear, check this out. Very interesting. So we're in Exodus 3:14. This is where we get this I am name for God. As I was going over Exodus chapter 3 here, and thinking about this I am name, and thinking about the things that are here, I remember that Jesus used this name. And he used this name to ascribe to himself. And I thought, what a great passage to use with Jehovah's Witnesses. Because Jehovah's Witnesses, if you don't know, I'm sure you've had them come to your door. So maybe this can arm you and prepare you. And it's not a matter of if, but when. It's imminent. You will see them again. And so that's why I hope that maybe you are jotting down, taking notes. It's important to understand they don't believe that Jesus is God. Not only do they not believe that Jesus is God, they are very emphatic about the fact that Jesus never claimed to be God. And so there's all kinds of passages we could turn to point out where Jesus is called God. You know, Thomas says he wouldn't believe unless he saw the wounds in his side. And then he sees him, he says, my Lord and my God. Well, they have a comeback for that. They'll say Thomas was blaspheming right there. No, not contextually speaking, no. He's not blaspheming. Jesus would have corrected him immediately if he was blaspheming and giving an oh my God moment right there. No, he saw it was truly an oh my God moment. It is God in a bod. Or we could look at John chapter 1. That's one of the greatest passages to turn to show that Jesus is God. It says that in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And if there's any question about who is that Word, then it personifies him. He was in the beginning with God. You go down a little bit more to verse 14. It says, this Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. And so that's Jesus. The same way that a human hand can occupy a glove, this Word of God, who is God, occupied a human body, and he dwelt among us. But they have comebacks for these things. They're not good ones. They try and insert a word there that's literally not there in the Greek. They try and put the letter A there. So they'll say, yeah, it reads like this. Actually, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was a, little g, God. He's not actually God. That's their New World Translation. and it's not really a translation at all. And if you want some accountability of, okay, where are your scholars that came up with this? They say, well, they're so humble. They realized they put together such a brilliant translation that they didn't want to take any credit for it, and so they rather remain anonymous. They remain anonymous because there's no accountability, because there's a lot of scholarship out there that would like to call them out on that and say, hey, how did you come to these conclusions? So it seems like they already have this preconceived idea that Jesus is not God, and so they try and press that into the scriptures. Eisegesis. So they got their little escape hatches that they use for these common passages. But there's some things that I believe you really cannot escape, and this is one of them here in Exodus chapter 3. And I'm going to kind of set it up for you, but I got to make this point too, and I really do believe this is sort of a God thing here, is that as I was consciously thinking about the fact that Exodus chapter 3 is the perfect passage to bring up with Jehovah's Witnesses. Meanwhile, I got my son that's being a handful. My wife's out running errands, my daughter's in school, and my son is like, daddy, 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 and I'm trying to get to a message together kind of in, final moments. I needed some time to focus. I was short on time. I decided, all right, I'll get him off my hands by hooking him up with some candy. We'll break a little rule. I'll fill up a little red cup, with some candy and set him up on the couch. And so he got quiet, and he's just chowing down on that candy. So I'm thinking of this Exodus chapter 3. What a perfect passage to bring up with the Jehovah's Witnesses, because I do know that Jesus will use this passage to ascribe to himself. And as I'm consciously thinking about that, and just the thought of, I've never had Jehovah's Witnesses come to my place here. All the places I've lived before, they've come to the door. But I've been here for some years now. They've never come here to my door. What a perfect passage to share with them. I had the Bible in hand, in my kitchen. And what do I hear at the door? Now, 99.9% of the time, what could that be? An Amazon package that my wife ordered, But something made the hairs raise on my arm, and I thought to myself, what if it's Jehovah's Witnesses? And so I go there to the door, I look through the little peephole, and what do I see? It's not the Mormons, it's the JWs. I couldn't believe it. I had Exodus 3 already open. I'm pacing back and forth thinking, I am them right now. Like, they're getting this. Well, meanwhile, my son had already chowed down on most of that candy, so he is just in the fourth dimension, like on a sugar high, right? And so he's so excited every time someone's at the door, he wants to know who's at the door. And like, we have this hard rule, like, hey, you do not answer the door. Like, mom and dad get the door. And no matter how many times we go over this one, he's like a little pit bulldog. Like, I can't even begin to crack that door without him sticking his head through the door. And so I'm trying to pull him back, and I can't get him to stay back. And he had this thing that he was doing for a little while at church. It was really embarrassing. But then I began to realize, you know what? It actually might be a gift. There were certain people, and only certain people, and I didn't know why at first, but then I noticed a pattern. Certain people, he would hiss at them. He'd be like, and I'm like, son, stop. Like, not at church, come on. But the more he began to do that to certain people and not others, I began to notice, like, maybe he has the gift of discernment, because I kind of get a weird feeling about that person over there. And it kind of turned into a thing where people come up to us, I'd behold him, he'd hiss at them. I'd be like, yeah, I get a weird feeling about that person as well. And so that door's cracking open. I finally just kind of give in, like, let him go through the door. He sticks his head out. I hear the JWs go, what a cute little boy. And what's my son do? I hear him go, I'm like, yep. They're like stepping back, like, oh. And so he goes running out there on the front lawn. And so now I've got him right there. It's just, I kept the Bible, like, I put it down to the side because I didn't want them to see me just coming right with it right away. And we had this conversation where they wanted to talk about eternity and how your loved ones will not spend eternity in hell. Well, that sounds very palatable, doesn't it? And I went to the scriptures where, I pointed out, Jesus, he took a lot of time talking about the subject of hell. In fact, you could fact check him on this, read the 4 Gospels, and I think you'll see that he actually spent more time talking about the reality of hell than anything else. And he talked about it as a real conscious place of torment, a place where it would be better for you that if your right hand causes you to sin, to cut it off and cast it from you. And it's better for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. He called it a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. He's very clear about how in Matthew he talked about how these would go on into aionios in the Greek. It's eternity into everlasting life. And in that same breath, in that same verse, he talked about everlasting punishment. And so it's a real eternal place, and it's a conscious place, and you don't want anyone to go there. And so I realized, though, we're off track, because really what matters the most is the question of who do you say that Jesus is? And I understand you guys don't believe that Jesus is God. I already know that. But I think I could show you from the scriptures that Jesus, not only does it say he is God, he claims to be God. And so you know how they usually have sort of an older JW, and they got their little protege right next to them. They're like, oh yeah, well, we would like to see that. It's like, all right. Let me set it up like this, first of all. We know that context matters. We know that the Jews of Jesus' day, they wanted to get him on something, but they couldn't just kill him for any reason. Why? Well, because they followed the letter of their law. They can't just stone somebody because they disagree with them. They can't just stone somebody because they think that they're a little bit out of their mind. They need a reason from the law to stone somebody. And there are certain reasons they can stone somebody to death for. Capital punishment. For being a murderer or a rapist, or molester, right? There's certain reasons, or blasphemy. They could stone people for that reason, but they can't just stone somebody for any reason just because they don't like them and they don't like their teaching. So are we clear on that? Yeah, we're clear on that. Cool. Let's go to Exodus chapter 3. We read Exodus chapter 3. What is the name that God used to reveal to them? What is his name? It is the I Am. Great. Let's go to John chapter 8 in the New Testament. So we're in John chapter 8. And if you guys want to turn there or take note, and I can read it for you, John chapter 8, I would say starting off hmm, 52. 8:52. So the Jews are challenging Jesus, ironically, like they did with Moses, on identity. Remember, who do you think you are? Well, they're going on and on about their pedigree and how they come from their father Abraham. But who are you, Jesus? And this might be sort of a jab at him, because they think that he's an illegitimate child. They've observed how Joseph and Mary weren't really married yet when they had this Jesus. So who is your father, Jesus? Who's your dad? And so Jesus is finally going to get around to telling them who he really is. And so looking at verse 52, then the Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham is dead, and the prophets are dead. And you say, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who was dead? So you see how they're claiming their little pedigree. And the prophets are dead? Who do you make yourself out to be? And Jesus answered, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father who honors me, of whom you say that he is your God? Yet you have not known him, but I know him. And if I say I do not know him, I shall be a liar like you. But I do know him and keep his word. And then he says, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Look at their response. They're thinking, this guy's 5150. Because how is he saying to have seen Abraham? What do they follow up with? Verse 57, then the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? This isn't a guy that need to pick up stones and throw out. This is a guy that needs our help. We need to get him into a facility, right? But then Jesus' response, Jesus said to them, most assuredly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. In the Greek, ego eimi. Jesus is directly taking from the Septuagint that name of God in Exodus 3:14. Tell them that ego eimi has sent me to you. One of the most revered names for God. That is the name for God. And Jesus is describing that name of God, the burning bush, the God that spoke to Moses. And he's basically opening up a translation of that day and finally just giving it to them. You guys want to know who I am? Turn with me here. Exodus 3:14, find the burning bush, find God speaking to Moses. That's who I am standing before you right now. He claimed to be God. And it was not lost upon the Jews of that time. Because look at the immediate response after he says, most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, ego on me. They knew he claimed to be God. Why? Verse 59. Then they took up stones to throw at him. What justification would they have from their law to stone him? Well, the only justification they thought they had him on was blasphemy. In fact, just a couple chapters later, Jesus is in another situation where they're picking up stones to stone him. And he says, many good works I performed in your sight. For which of these do you want to stone me? And they say, not for a good work, but for blasphemy. For you, being a man, make yourself to be God. And so I pointed out to the JWs at the door, Jesus claimed to be God. And we know that contextually from the response of the Jews. They understood what he was claiming as well. The problem here is although he claimed to be God, the Pharisees did not believe he was God. That's the company that you're in. And I don't know if that's good company to be in, because like the Pharisees, you too do not believe that Jesus is God. Well, I remember the younger one that was kind of the new JW, they're literally holding Exodus 3:14 in place and John 8:58 and just going back and forth, looking at that and saying, I had never seen that before. And so you see the eyes are opening right there. And of course, what's the other one do? Well, we got to get out of here, pop smoke. And so they're like, well, we see you got your hands full with your son. We don't want to take up most of your day. I go, no, I got all the time in the world. Let's stay and talk. We got other homes we got to get to. Well, let's get together. I would like to get together sometime and go over these things. Oh, yeah, sure. Well, let's set it up. I'm not always home. Take down my number. Oh, yeah, okay. And so I start sharing my number with them. I see they're not taking it down. I'm like, are you taking? They're like, oh, yeah. They hold their phone up. Yeah, we got it. All right. And I go, all right, repeat it back to me so I know you got it. And they go, we got it. So haven't heard from them, since. But here's the real personal part, guys. This is what I want you to get. Is that same Moses that heard from that burning bush, who is God and who we know now as Jesus, ascribing that name to himself, that same I am that commissioned Moses with the let my people go message, is this Jesus who gave us what in Matthew 28? The Great Commission. He wants us to go out there. And so there is a sort of Pharaoh that we're up against in this day and age. It's the God of this age, as the Bible calls him. The Bible's very clear. This is global war on terrorism. It says the whole world lies under the sway of the evil one. He's like that prowling lion seeking who he may devour. And so he wants to steal, kill, and destroy. He wants to take down your family. He wants to go after those that you work with. He wants to go after your friends. But God has weaponized you and I with the message. He wants us to be his Moseses, his patriots, to go out there and spread this message of let my people go. And what is this message of let my people go? What is this freedom message? It's the gospel. What does the gospel do? It sets captive people free from the bondage and slavery of sin. And there's so many in the world that don't even realize the slavery and the bondage that they're into. But we as Christians, we've had our eyes opened. And so we know. Isn't it evil of us to not share the gospel with people when we are eyes open to what's going on? I mean, there's literally a crime that could be committed today called depraved indifference. Even the secular world acknowledges depraved indifference as being evil. And it basically goes like this. If you're walking along one day and suddenly you see maybe a stroller go into a park and nobody else noticed, and there's a child there that's drowning, knee-deep water, and you could do something about it, who wouldn't, right? But you could do something about it, but instead you just stand there and you sit there and you watch and you allow that all to go down and happen. That's criminal. And you could actually spend your time, the rest of your days, in prison for that. It's called depraved indifference. Letting a child like that drown to death when you were capable of at least extending a hand. Well, in a very similar way, when you think about it, we're looking at a world all around us and people are drowning in sin. The thing is, their eyes aren't open to it, but our eyes are. Don't we believe Jesus when he says, wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction? There are many that go in by it. In other words, Jesus is telling you, you're looking at a majority of the world that is drowning in sin, but I want you to go out there on this rescue mission and throw the lifeline out there to them. We can't make them grab it, but at the very least, we could throw that lifeline out there to them. And this principle of depraved indifference, you could say it's acknowledged divinely as well. In Ezekiel Chapter 3, when Ezekiel's being spoken to, God's speaking to Ezekiel, he gave a message to Ezekiel that he wanted him to spread to the people. And these were bad people. These were people that were committing sin. They were wicked people. In Ezekiel Chapter 3, I think it starts around verse 17 to paraphrase it, but he basically says to him, like, Son of man, I've made you a watchman over the house of Israel. He says, therefore, when I give you a word that I want you to share with wicked people so that they could flee from their wicked way, and you don't share that with them, he says they'll die in their iniquity. They'll still die. They're bad. They're going to die because they're bad. But he says, their blood I will require at your hand. In other words, there will be accountability for that. And the flip side of that, though, he says if you do give them that word and they still don't flee from their wicked way, they will die because of their iniquity, but your hands will be washed clean. So depraved indifference, the secular world sees it, and there certainly is that accountability that we'll have before God. All Christians will stand in judgment before God. It's not that white throne judgment, but he will take into consideration to what did you do with the time, the resources, the knowledge that you had. And so some rewards will be given and some rewards will be taken away. If that's not enough, how about we take it from the word of an atheist? Like, why aren't we out there sharing the gospel? Why are we so afraid to share this message, this freedom message? It's crazy. And so even atheists acknowledge this. You guys have heard of Penn and Teller out in Las Vegas, the magicians, illusionists. One of them, Penn Jillette, he's this famous Las Vegas magician, illusionist. He's also been on TV, on The Apprentice. You would recognize the guy. He's got the ponytail, kind of a big guy. He's also a very outspoken atheist. So he spends a lot of his time and energy speaking out against the existence of God, focused really on, Christianity, because that's where a lot of the power is. But he did this video, and he put it out online, on YouTube. It's called Gift of a Bible. And in this video, what he does is he actually calls out Christians. And you would think an atheist, they would just want you to keep your mouth shut and keep it to yourself. We don't want to hear it. We don't talk religion. Keep that at home. Don't bring that out into the workplace. Don't bring that out into, the public spectrum. But at least he sees the logic to it, the logical outworkings. If you really believe what you believe, why aren't you sharing it? That's what he challenges people with. And so I wrote down some of the things that he said. I transcribed some of this. It's worth checking out when you go home, though. It's called Gift of a Bible. And he's just speaking right into the camera. And you could tell something's going on inside of his heart and mind. He's a little teary-eyed. He says to Christians, he says, I've always said that I don't respect people who don't evangelize. I don't respect that at all. If you believe that there is a heaven and a hell, and people could be going to hell, or not getting eternal life, and you think that it's not really worth telling them this because it would make things socially awkward? He questions, he says, how much do you have to hate somebody to not evangelize? How much do you have to hate somebody to believe that everlasting life is possible and not tell them about it? And then he gives this practical example. He says, if I believed beyond the shadow of a doubt that a truck was coming at you, and you didn't believe that the truck was bearing down on you, there is a certain point, he says, where I will tackle you. And then he goes on to say, and this is more important than that. An atheist, speaking of the gospel, says this is more important than that. He's saying, I don't believe what you guys believe, but he is challenging us. If you really believe it, how much do you have to hate somebody to believe it's true and just stare at them and not share it with them? Well, I got to thank him for that. Thank you for the motivation, and thank you for what a great instrument, a resource to use. Because we've all been there before where we want to share the gospel with the person across from us, but for some reason we blink. We hesitate. The moment comes and it goes. It passes. We miss that opportunity. And maybe we don't open our mouths because we're concerned that it might become socially awkward. Maybe we're getting along with this person so much. We have so much in common with the person sitting across from you or the doctor in the office, wherever it is. You guys are into the same sports teams. You guys are into the same things, but then all of a sudden you get this tug. Share the Lord with them. And you think to yourself, it's going to make everything just blow up. Everything's going so smooth right now. You're afraid to bring up that taboo topic, and you don't really know how to bring it up. Or we're coming up on a time where we're going to be around a lot of family, extended family that we don't often see. You know, Aunt so-and-so or the crazy uncle, right? It's like, you know, if you bring it up to him, he's going to blow up on you. He's got his bumper sticker slogans. He's going to throw your way. And it just never goes good. And so I should bring it up. I should share the gospel with these people. But you don't want everything to just explode. Well, I say thank you for this instrument. Thank you for this gift called Gift of a Bible. Because I'm telling you, if you preface that conversation with these words, it sets the tone in a really good way. I use this when I feel like it's going to be really hard to share the gospel with this person. Like one of the recent times, I had a girl that was outspoken lesbian, turned out, cutting my hair. And she's talking about some real nasty things. And she's sharing these nasty things with the girl across from her. And we're wrapping up the haircut, and suddenly the Lord's like, share the gospel with her. You know, I could sense it. I'm like, oh man, like this is going to go so bad right now. And I just felt that tug to do it. I'm like, Lord, let's just wait towards the end of the haircut so she doesn't totally wreck me. But this girl's going to cut my ear off, you know. And so I just decided, all right, man, I'm going to go for it. And so I thought, well, I'll use that Penn Jillette video. I'll use that as an example. I'm telling you, this defuses the bomb that's about to go off. So I said, hey, I got a question for you. You've heard of Penn and Teller before? Yeah, Penn and Teller. Yeah, it's famous Las Vegas magician and illusion. You might remember from that program, The Apprentice. Donald Trump, that was on that program too. And she said, yeah. He put this video out online. It's an interesting one. It's called Gift of a Bible. Basically what he does is he's an atheist, but he calls out Christians and basically says that if you believe that everlasting life is possible and you're not willing to share that with people, he says, how much do you have to hate somebody to believe that everlasting life is possible and not share that with them? So this girl, and I've used it since then so many times, they all see the logic to that. It kind of catches them off guard. You know what they do? She did this. She goes, you know what? Yeah, I guess that's right. My follow-up, and because I don't hate you, and because I love you, would you please allow me to share some things with you? It just completely diffused the bomb. And there were a lot of people who were listening at that moment too. You know, like everyone got quiet, stared at me like, is this guy really going to do this right now? And so I got to share the gospel in full with them. And it kind of came to a point where it was like, all right, that was it. And she kind of got quiet. I paid. Everyone's still staring at me. I went walking out. And it's one of those, glass, all out in front. I go, hang a right. Everyone's looking at me still like, oh, man, keep going. And I'm all right, I did it. I got it. And then I realized, oh, no, my car's the other way. So I have to walk past. I look back, and they're still staring at me. like. But the point being is that I could kind of foresee how that conversation was one of those ones that would have gotten very volatile. It would have blown up. But I got to set it up with that. And so I've done that with family members, too. I've done it with my grandpa. I've done it with my aunt. These are people that conversation is not going to go well. I could tell them, because I don't hate you and because I love you, can I share some things with you? And it just kind of just sets the motive. Then you're not suddenly like that judgmental, hypocritical Christian who thinks he's holier than thou up there on your pedestal. It's like that's not who we are, but we get stereotyped like that. And so you could share with them the true motive of these things. And so that's a great tool. Gift of a Bible, use it. Thanksgiving coming up, I'm telling you. And so we've been called to go and share this message. We've heard it from our Savior. We've heard it from atheists. We've heard it from even that principle, depraved indifference. So why aren't we out there doing it? We should do it. And maybe one final thought of motivation. I want you to think of this like you are SEALs, Navy SEALs for Christ. That just as Navy SEALs have been given a duty and a task to do what? To sabotage the plans of the enemy. Suicide bombers who are strapped with a vest, they know they're going down, those that are wearing it. And what is their goal? Take out as many people with them as they possibly can in the process. And what I want you to understand is this is what we are up against. we are up against the ultimate suicide bomber, Satan. He's strapped. We've read the back of the book. He's going down, and he knows he's going down. But like any suicide bomber, he doesn't want to just take himself out. He's looking to take out as many people with him as he possibly can in the process. But you and I have been given a weapon that could really reach out and touch somebody to make a difference, right? It's the gospel message. So one of my favorite quotes by C.S. Lewis, I'll wrap on this one. He says, enemy-occupied territory, that is what this world is. But Christianity is the story of how our rightful king has landed, you might say in disguise, and now he's calling us all to take part in his great campaign of sabotage. Have you ever wanted to be a saboteur with some divine justification? We're vandalizing the kingdom of darkness. We're putting a dent in it. How? By spreading that kingdom of light. By spreading that let my people go message, the gospel message. Amen?